We will get to my interview in just a moment, but if you wouldn't mind becoming a supporter and helping my independent journalism, click in the comments, or there should be a link down below. You can sign up for my Locals community. Locals is where I have all of my exclusive content, and you're supporting my independent journalism. I left my job in the mainstream media in order to do this, and I'm doing it for all of you. Please consider becoming a supporter. I'm going to bring him in now. Here, hello, sir.
How you doing, Dave?
It's great to see you. We're live on my Locals platform. I'm going to be putting this out on Facebook and YouTube later in the week, but
great.
We've known each other for a while, and I think you may have, I don't know how we got talking about it, but this case is really interesting. And you are a defense attorney, correct?
That's right.
Okay. So I want to play in courts. For those of you who don't know, for those of you in Michigan, this was a nationwide story. So the shooter, I don't have to say alleged, because
sure,
he's going to prison. So he is responsible for killing classmates. His mom and dad were arrested shortly after this, and they are both charged with, I believe it's involuntary manslaughter. Correct?
You're right.
Yeah, involuntary. Yeah. So today they had the opening arguments for his mom, Jennifer. She's being charged separately from the dad. I want to play like 40 seconds of the opening arguments real quick. We'll be up on the screen, and you should be able to hear this. It's going to be from both sides. It's just really quick.
She didn't pull the trigger, but she's responsible. But there is no claim that she gifted that firearm to her son knowing he was going to commit the attack. There's no claim that she wanted him to commit the attack. So how can she be held responsible when her son pulled the trigger? And the answer is she's not charged with murder. She's charged with involuntary manslaughter.
In the days following the event, while the prosecution says the evidence will show Jennifer Crumbley is lying, Jennifer Crumbley is truthfully telling the world she had no idea, and finding out that she is about to be charged in this Band-Aid effort by the prosecution with involuntary manslaughter. Jennifer and James Crumbley go to the bank. They're advised by friends and family, and you will hear testimony that their money could all be taken out of their accounts, and they know they need money to be able to live and hire lawyers and figure out what to do. They withdraw all of the money from their bank account. The burner phones they're using, they can't get access to any of their accounts.
So what she's talking about there is the law enforcement. I remember when it happened. I don't know if you remember, if you were following it, they were claiming that the mom and dad were on the run. They were gone. They were taken off out of town. And that's why you being a defense attorney, even if, things play out in court for a reason. So what's your take on the charges of the parents? No matter what, this is a horrible situation all around.
Sure.
But this case, though, could have impact on the whole nation, right? Possibly?
Yeah, well, it's the first case in the nation to ever try to hold parents criminally responsible for the actions of their children, their minor child in this case. Although we treat him on one side of our mouths, we treat him as an adult and we hold him to that standard, and he's pled guilty to murder, and he's already in prison for the rest of his life. So there's one train of thought that the responsible party is the young man who, although he's a child, and the science tells us that a person's brain isn't fully formed until age about 23, we held him as an adult, and he pled guilty to this horrific tragedy that he caused, and he caused solely by doing this. So it's a very slippery slope, and it's an overreach in my opinion, not just as a criminal defense attorney, but as a parent. It's an overreach, and I'm confident. I think the jury will probably see it that way as well.
Because you get a case, let's say there, and I'm not a lawyer. I was going to say I should have became one. I probably couldn't have passed the test to do it, but let's say they're both convicted, and then you get a case 2 years from now, something happens. Are other prosecutors going to look at this and say, okay, let's charge the parents? Is it going to open up more of and then you get the slippery slope. Well, how much was the parent involved? You know, because
Sure.
I don't know.
Yeah, it's that's a good question, but that's why we have jury systems, because the juries keep the government in check. And if they reject this, like I feel they will, if they keep feeling an emotion out of the courtroom like they're supposed to and they're instructed, then that'll send a message back to the Oakland County prosecutor that this is a tragic series of events that happened. It's terrible, but you can't hold parents responsible for something that their children did on these set of facts. Now, if there's evidence that the parents knew that this kid was, like the professionals, medical professionals said, never let this kid even own a BB gun, a butter knife, nothing, and they did. Now you're talking about opening up some criminal responsibility.
I'm reading the comments right here, and just random people, and didn't his dad purchase the gun? I believe his dad did purchase the gun.
Yeah.
But I think the defense would probably say he didn't purchase the gun for him to shoot the other classmates, right? I mean,
right. Yeah. Well, the dad, certainly there was some negligence here by purchasing this gun or leaving it where somebody could have access to it. But we have a whole other system of justice for that. It's called the civil system, where the parents would be held at a lower standard, preponderance of the evidence standard, responsible for these deaths. And there's lawsuits pending right now against the school district, against the parents, against, who knows, the gun manufacturer, the manufacturer of the bullets. We don't know. I mean, there's a civil courtroom for that.
Yeah.
We're talking about a criminal courtroom today.
Yeah. Some people would argue, because I read up the report, there was an independent report that was released that said there were people in the school that failed miserably that day. For those of you who don't know, he was in the principal's office or counselor's office the morning of the shooting. The report flat out blames several people at the school. So then, some would argue, why wouldn't they be charged with involuntary manslaughter? I mean,
right. They certainly, you could argue they contributed, but, they saw the drawing that was made of the gun. They saw the statements that were made on the drawing, and they didn't say to the parents, you have to take your child out of school. They allowed him to stay in school and be there that day. Now, the parents could have, I guess, trumped that and said, well, what do you think? Should we remove him from school today? But nobody did, because at that time, he didn't present, from my understanding, he didn't present as somebody that was going to do that, or they didn't know that there was a gun. I think the prosecution's making a little bit of hay about, well, you should have told them that, hey, he owns a gun, and maybe that would have changed things. Yeah. But, you can Monday morning quarterback all day. There was a lot of things that could have, would have, should have.
Yeah. Obviously, what I've researched and what I've known, it seems like but we don't know. The trial's happening now. What's been out in the media and what's come out from the prosecution is that these parents are horrible human beings. Yeah. But as a journalist, that's why I say I want to report all sides. That's what they say. And they made it look really bad, and they may be horrible people, but there's another side, and that's what our court system is for. That's why they don't try cases in the media, or at least they shouldn't.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it's unfortunate because, the Oakland County Prosecutor's Office, it appears, leaked a lot of bad parent evidence or bad people evidence. They're having an affair. They're talking to this person. They're talking about... That's not admissible. That's not really admissible as far as character, because character evidence is never admissible in court unless the defense puts it into issue. So the prosecution can't come in and argue this person's bad or this person... they grew up in poverty conditions, so they just have bad character. That's totally inadmissible, not relevant to the charges. But now if the defense puts good character evidence in, like this person's an honest person or a good person, now the government can put in the bad evidence, if there's some that exist.
A simple question, I'll let you go a little bit. What is involuntary manslaughter? what is that basically? Is it where if I have a party and the kids are drinking and the kid goes and kills someone and I allowed the kid to drink? Is that an example of involuntary?
Yeah, that would be the involuntary manslaughter is a death that occurs due to gross negligence. You were grossly not just regular negligence. You committed a mistake. You were grossly negligent. You created a situation that you knew would be likely to cause this result. This result being death. That's involuntary. Voluntary manslaughter is a crime of passion. You meant to hurt somebody. You come home and catch your spouse with somebody else, and you go into a rage. You hit that person with your fist, and they die. Well, it's a crime of passion. You committed a crime. That's voluntary manslaughter. That's the easiest way to put it. But involuntary is what we're talking about here, which would be gross negligence. To put it in perspective, gross negligence is the highest standard of negligence. It's not just an accident. It's you were so grossly negligent that you knew your son had mental illness, and yet you put a gun with bullets in the gun in his hand and said, "Here, go for a walk," and then he killed people. That's not what happened here, but that's what gross negligence would be.
And then the next step is homicide, right? I mean,
well, and then after manslaughter would be second-degree murder.
Second-degree murder. Yeah. Okay. So that's kind of cut and dry. I have a teenager. I throw a party for 10 kids. I get them wasted and completely drunk. I, as an adult, know and then, hey, get in the car and go and kill someone. That's obvious that I'm grossly negligent in that situation. Well,
you would be really grossly negligent if you said, "Here's the keys, go drive the car." Not just some high school kids having a party and you bought the booze, but you didn't take their keys and you encouraged them to drive. You said, "Oh, it's only a block. You can drive home drunk. Go ahead." Now you're grossly negligent.
Okay, that's a good example of what that is. And in this situation, though, the prosecution would have to prove. I mean, given that example right there, then you would think the prosecution would have to prove that there was gross negligence, that they knew he was possibly going to do this, but we don't know.
Possibly. They knew that he was so mentally ill that he would do something like this. It's gross negligence. It's even more likely than not that he would do this. And that's why the government here, the Oakland County Prosecutor's Office, has a high burden, the highest burden we have, proof beyond a reasonable doubt, to prove this fact. And again, as long as you keep feelings, emotions out of the courtroom, and the jury follows their instructions, the appropriate verdict, in my opinion, here should be not guilty. But it's going to be tough. The defense has a tough battle because it's hard to separate the feeling and emotion when you have the victims' families testifying, people who were shot that lived testifying. I mean, it's going to be hard to ask the jury, don't have any feelings and emotion, just judge this case on the facts. And so that's going to be difficult.
Someone just said in the comments, the kid was posting things on his social before he committed the crime. They have to prove that the parents, you have to prove things in a court of law, right? I mean, it's not just what you hear in the media.
I would ask any adult, when you were 15, 16, 17 years old, did your parents know everything you were doing? I can tell you mine didn't.
No, and they still don't. Well, they're gone now, but they didn't. Yeah. At the time this happened, obviously very emotional. Politicians got on camera. The prosecutor got on camera, and it starts then. Is that it takes a lot of for her to file the charges? Did that surprise you when those charges were filed against the parents?
Well, it did. It did surprise. It surprised me just because I know the background of the Oakland County prosecutor, the elected prosecutor. She comes from a defense side at one time, and so that surprised me. Prosecutors have enormous power. In fact, the most powerful position in any county is the elected prosecutor. Wow. The elected prosecutor has more power than judges, more powers because they determine who has charges brought against them. And so
And you just said one thing, elected. So they're an elected position. So there is pressure on that person to react to the community because.
Absolutely. Happens all the time. Yep.
And in your, I won't name anybody, but in your career, you've seen cases like that where the pressure in the community is, there's the law here, and then there's like the pressure, and the two shouldn't meet up. But
Absolutely. Perfect example is when you see people who commit operating while intoxicated and a death occurs from a traffic accident, but they're drunk.
Yeah.
Some overzealous prosecutors will charge second-degree murder instead of operating while intoxicated causing death. That's a 15-year felony, but second-degree murder is a life offense. My position is if the legislature in the state of Michigan wanted operating while intoxicated causing death to be a life offense, they would make it a life offense. But they come up with novel legal theories like they have here, and they bring these charges because it's very easy to bring charges. But it's a lot harder to prove them beyond a reasonable doubt. That's why we have the jury and the jury system. They can keep their government in check by rejecting novel legal theories.
Yeah, interesting because this hasn't been done in the United States. And like you said, it could be, you could get a county with a really overzealous prosecutor that who knows what could charge it. You're right. I see your point, and the people watching, even people listening who might say the parents are horrible, but what precedent does it set? Because when other cases are filed, that's how case law goes, right? You can always cite a case in Michigan back in this, like 10 years from now, if they're convicted for some reason, attorneys can cite this case, right?
Well, if they're convicted and then they would have what's called an appeal of right, it would go to the Court of Appeals. Everybody convicted has an appeal of right. If the Court of Appeals upholds the convictions on this novel legal theory, if a jury is to render a guilty verdict or verdicts, then that would become case law that they could point to in order to support cases, perhaps cases that aren't leading to death, other cases.
Gotcha.
Okay. I gave the example of the OWI or drunk driving causing death being charged. Under that novel legal theory, you could charge attempted murder for every single person that ever drove a vehicle intoxicated. So think about it. Where does it stop?
Yeah. Wow. It really makes you think. And that's one reason why, I left the media. I talked to you before I did it at one point, I remember. And
yes, you did.
This is one reason why, because every reporter covering this story down there, they're probably allowed to cover it for 2 minutes. You cannot really dig into an issue like this for 2 minutes. And I think, and you probably that frustration with you probably, you've been on high profile cases throughout your career, or cases that are in the newspaper or TV. You really aren't getting the full case by reading the paper or watching the news, right? You're not.
No. In fact, jurors are instructed, do not watch media, do not read the newspaper, do not read about this case, don't look at social media. They don't want, the judge will instruct them not to watch the Dave Bondy interview at all, because it's only admissible evidence in a court of law. So even me, not being in the courtroom, just telling you what I know about the case, whether I have direct knowledge, indirect knowledge, hearsay knowledge, whatever, they can't go by my opinion because I'm outside the courtroom. I'm not a witness.
I would hope most jurors would abide by that. You'd hope.
Yeah.
But nowadays, it's so, you can't avoid this thing, or So
I've talked to jurors who've served on previous trials, and it's unfortunate. Some of them have said to me, they were talking about the case before it was time to deliberate, and they had looked at social media about certain cases. So you hope they follow their instructions. If they get caught, they could cause a mistrial.
Yeah.
They could cause a mistrial.
Wow. Well, I appreciate you with your expertise. It's been a long time coming. And
I can tell you this, Dave, also, I wanted to mention Shannon Smith, the defense attorney in the mother's trial, is a personal friend of mine. I know her. I've not talked to her about this case, she's been subject to a gag order.
Oh.
I haven't consulted on the case at all. I mean, I've read and I've seen some things, but she's a very, very good lawyer. And so I am confident that she'll give a vigorous defense. And I'm confident the prosecution will give a vigorous prosecution. But at the end of the day, you hope jurors will follow the instructions. The judge gives them the instructions on the law. The jury and the jurors are the ultimate finder of fact. They're the judge of facts. They can accept any fact they want or reject any fact they want. And I think that this jury, if they follow those instructions, should come to the correct verdict. And I say it should be not guilty, but I'm not in that courtroom. So if they hear something or see something different, we will always, as defense attorneys and prosecutors who are charged with being ministers of justice, will respect the verdict of the jury.
Last thing, like you said earlier, it's going to be extremely tough, and it is for human beings to take emotions out of it. I mean, it's not easy to do, but does the judge tell them that? Literally?
Yes, there's standard jury instructions. The judge will tell them they're the judge, they're the ultimate judges of fact, that they are not to let any emotion or feeling enter into their deliberation. The judge will give them standard instructions on all the elements of the offense and tell them that the prosecution must prove each and every element beyond a reasonable doubt. If they fail to prove one element, the verdict must be not guilty.
And that's a good for anyone watching right now who may be a juror in the future. That's something good to know. It may be tough. I covered crime for 25 years, and I tried my best to be unbiased, and it was tough at times. You have a 5-year-old child is shot and killed or something, but that's people would get mad at me when I would say, he is accused, he's alleged of this, he's not convicted. This case, for example, when the shooter and the teenager, I could not convict him on the air. I couldn't say, even though there's surveillance cameras and people were threatening me, saying, why don't you just say he did it? I'm like, because he has not been convicted in a court of law. People don't get that, I think, in this country. Even the most horrible person, as a journalist, you need to assume they're innocent until proven guilty.
Yeah. Well, the judge will instruct the jury at the beginning of the trial and before their deliberation that the defendant is presumed to be not guilty, presumed innocent. Mm-hmm. We're cloaked with the presumption of innocence here. And that's not just for good people, that's for bad people, that's for all people alleged to have committed a crime, are cloaked with the presumption of innocence.
Gotcha. Good lesson to end this with. And if I get another legal case and you have time, I'd love to have you back on.
Yeah, if you do any follow-up throughout the trial, you let me know, and if I can make it happen, I'll make